Today we're going to be learning about probability using the Sherpa online classroom, and all that means is how likely something will happen. The first example we're going to use is the coin toss, and to understand probability you have to understand the vocabulary. So let's look at the AND statement with the first question. So what is the probability that when I toss two coins, coin 1 and 2 both land on heads? Well, we draw the tree for this, heads and tails on the first coin toss, and heads and tails on the second coin toss. So as we see here, the probability of landing on a head or a tail in all of these examples is a half, because there are two equally possible results. And we're looking at this path here, so head and head. And this means that we can disregard the rest of the tree. We don't worry about that for now. So because it's an AND statement, what we need to do is multiply these two probabilities together. So it's a half times a half, which is going to equal 1/4. Therefore, the probability that coin 1 will be the same as coin 2, and both of those will be a head, is 1/4. And if we look at the area that we disregarded, that's going to be 3/4 probability. And as we know, 1/4 is the probability that we calculated. So the good way to check that your answer is correct is if you calculate the other probabilities and add them to yours, it should always equal 1. Now let's look at the example of a die, and more particularly, the OR statement. Now, the OR statement is something like, what is the probability that we will roll a 2 or a 4? But the example we're going to go for here is going to be, what is the probability that when we roll the die, we're going to get an answer that is less than 4? And this is the same as saying the probability that we land on a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And what you'll find with probability questions is actually the largest part of these questions is just figuring out the vocab, figuring out what the question's asking you and which of these two statements to use. When we draw out our probability tree, we're going to get 6 branches for when we roll on a 1 through to 6, and each of these have a probability of 1/6. So the areas or branches that we're interested in are those top 3 branches, landing on a 1 or 2 or 3, which we'll highlight here. Now, working on the same level of the probability tree this time, again, we discard the area that we don't care about. Working on the same level, rather than multiplying the probabilities, we add them together. And all in all, this is going to equal 3/6, which we can simplify down to a half. So we have 50% probability of landing on less than 4 and 50% probability of landing on 4 or more. So what happens if I roll 2 dice? And what is the probability that the dice that we roll first is less than 4 and the dice that we roll second is greater than 4? And that's really important to remember, that it's greater than 4 and not greater than or equal to 4. So this time we're only going to look at the branches that we care about, because otherwise we're going to be here all day drawing them. And so that's for dice number 1 to roll a 1, a 2, or a 3. And then when we roll dice number 2, we want to know whether it's going to be a 5 or a 6, because those are the two values that are greater than 4. Now let's look at the branch that we care about, or at least the first branch. And at the very end of that, we have an OR statement. So 5 or 6 being the result of the second roll. So we can add those two probabilities together and get 2/6. Now we look at the probability of landing on a 1 to begin with and rolling a 5 or 6 afterwards. And the way we do that is we multiply it by that first layer. So when we do 2/6 times 1/6, we get 2/36. But because there's 3 different paths we can follow along here, so rolling a 2 and then getting a 5 or a 6 or a 3 and then getting a 5 or a 6. We know the probability of rolling a 5 or 6 is 2 over 6. So essentially, we do this 3 times. And because we can have either one of these, we can say this is an OR statement and add these together. So when we do 2 over 36 plus 2 over 36 plus 2 over 36, we're then going to get 6 over 36, which then simplifies down to 1 over 6, which is going to be our final answer. But let's look at that again. And because we knew the probabilities to begin with, because we calculated them, when we look at the probability of it being less than 4, we know it's a half. So we have a half that it's less than 4 and a half probability that it's 4 or greater than 4. We can simplify it down to a branch like this. And we know the probability of it being a 5 or a 6 is 2 over 6. And so we can create a much simpler tree by doing that. And when we do a half times 2 over 6, we get 2 over 12, which is 1 over 6. That's all we have time for with today's video. But as always, if you want to learn more, visit sherpa-online.com, the only place you should be going to find your own personal tutor to help you get ahead of your studies. You can pick from a whole range of tutors and see what others have to say about them. And then, when you found the right tutor for you, you can use a Sherpa Online Classroom, which we use today, to have online lessons with your tutors, where you can speak face-to-face no matter where you are in the world. That's sherpa-online.com. Visit it today.